My name is Sophie Hollis. I am the Community Engagement Librarian at NC Live, and we are so lucky today to have two attorneys from Disaster Legal Services here to talk about the FEMA process and how library professionals can participate in that process and help patrons recover from a major disaster like Hurricane Helene. So thank you both for joining us today. I'm excited to introduce to you Brooke Savage and Brad Pyland, who are going to go over this information. We're going to have about 30 minutes of presentation from our presenters, and then we have some Q&A time. If you submitted a question ahead of time, we've sent that ahead to the presenters, so they've had a chance to kind of consider some of those questions. But please feel free in the second half of the presentation to submit questions through the chat or to unmute yourself and ask if you're feeling brave. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to our presenters.
You can go ahead, Brooks. Take it
Thanks,
away.
Brett. Yeah. Hey, everyone. I'm very happy to be here with y'all virtually and to have this as a resource moving forward on y'all's webinar platform in YouTube. And I will apologize for my background. I am currently in the Hendersonville DRC, and this is the Hendersonville DRC's electrical closet. So there's a big fair going on, and we're helping a lot of folks today, but it's a little too busy in the main room, so I'm back here. And I am a licensed attorney in North Carolina. I've been practicing a good number of years now doing disaster work. Started out at Legal Aid of North Carolina with Brad, actually. We both worked together at that organization, and now still continuing disaster recovery work full-time with the state of North Carolina.
I'm Brad Pyland, as Brooks mentioned. I sort of got my start in disaster relief work first as a volunteer, and then I worked with Legal Aid's Disaster Relief Project for about 4 years. And currently, I also work with the state with the Hazard Mitigation Division in emergency management. So.
Great, thank you both so much. Can I go ahead and start these slides?
Yes, please. Just put in a quick disclaimer here. What this is really saying is what we're talking about today is legal information. It's not legal advice. Should you want to talk more about how to advise your entities, your libraries, or you personally, please do consult with an attorney on that. But today we're really covering a big overview of what is the disaster recovery framework, tailoring it to the Helene response, and then also to what you're most concerned about is how can you help as a library professional. Yep, a quick agenda here. We will get into FEMA. So we are targeting FEMA a bit. There's a lot of different sources of relief that we'll go and talk about later. But we focused some of our slides towards the end here just on FEMA to help out.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what we're trying to do too is, and I'm sure this is, maybe those on this webinar and a lot of the questions you're getting is at least one of the approaches we have is we try to give people, a sense not only of some of the specifics of FEMA, but where, it fits in the larger recovery process too. And it's, before we get started, it can be a confusing process, and, resources are always, becoming available, and then they're not available. And so, so if it seems like it's overwhelming, and it is a lot, it is. So, and I think starting with that, I found at least to be helpful for me, and, in trying to convey some of this information to others as well.
Next slide is fine. We don't need to spend too much time on this. It's just a big overview on all the different types of hazards and disasters that could result in an emergency declaration or a major disaster declaration. Right now, what we're experiencing with Helene was a natural and severe weather disaster. When it made landfall for North Carolina, it was a tropical storm. And the last time that we've seen something like this in the West was Tropical Storm Fred in 2021. And we've got a graphic later on to show the history of the types of disasters that have impacted North Carolina. But you'll see that. Brad, I don't think I have too much more on this one.
No, I mean, it's, there are a lot of different, I know people will think about natural disasters, but it does, expand beyond that. But for this, I know, and this is one of the things too, I think one of the defining feature of this are just how many of those bullet points in the natural and severe weather are contained in this one storm too, which is very unusual, to say the least. So.
All right. So our graphic, I think some things, some formatting may have gotten thrown off when we're sharing slides, but we've tried to highlight some of the key storms that have happened throughout the past decade, essentially. Hurricane Matthew was in 2016, Hurricane Florence in 2018. Those were largely impacting the coast. And then we had COVID, which was a declared disaster. And then Tropical Storm Fred in 2021 that did impact some of the dual impacted counties now in Western North Carolina. And that disaster declared Transylvania, Haywood, and Buncombe. But then we also had a state declaration that impacted surrounding counties as well. And then this year alone, we had Tropical Storm Debbie in 2024 and now Tropical Storm Helene. And this slide will show you the overview of the disaster impacted areas. This is FEMA's map, so you'll see the counties in which all of the counties in which individual assistance and or public assistance has been authorized in the major disaster declaration.
Yeah, see a couple of the tornadoes that were out east too. That's where, people are wondering. That's where a lot of that came from. So.
Brad, do you want to pick this one up on how disaster declarations get approved and the whole process for that?
Yeah. It's so here we have it's and I'll say this: all the slides look great, and I had really nothing to do with it. So Brooks did all the work. So I'll just go ahead and say that. She keeps saying we. It wasn't just her. But yeah, the presidential disaster declaration. We have a big, it's a big chart here, but essentially, what will happen initially is like once we see storms coming in, like at the state level, we'll prepare these declarations, and in the event that something does hit, and so once the storm comes about, really you're looking at a damage threshold is how you get to a presidentially declared disaster. And so sometimes what you will have is sometimes that process can take not long at all, or can take a little bit to sort of prove up and apply to FEMA for in the federal government for that designation. We've had some events that have the damage assessments have taken longer. Groups have to go out and see what's been damaged on the ground. This one, I think there was a presidentially declared disaster within a day of the events. It became apparent really quickly that it was significant and enough to meet that threshold. And so that's one of the reasons, it happened so quickly. It was such a big storm, but also what that does too is it unlocks all other types of assistance that are available, and does so a lot quicker. But here, with the chart, we see, there's the incident occurring, there's the initial response, and then trying to look down, and then, FEMA will deploy their teams to the area. Once the threshold is reached, there'll be a state FEMA agreement that's signed, and then state and federal authorities will get together. But a lot of it hinges on that damage threshold, and how quickly, or if one gets declared at all. As Brooks mentioned, sometimes there's storms like with Fred. There were some counties that hit that threshold for federal purposes, and that's where FEMA IA was able to be available. There were some other counties that were impacted, but it wasn't severe enough to reach that threshold. So a state declaration was declared, which opens up state money to some of those areas, and also SBA assistance programs like that. And this kind of goes into more detail, too, about the declaration process. They do have to. It is something that has to be requested. Usually that's not an issue, but any sort of assistance that we're looking for, at the locals reach out to the state, and the state will reach out to the federal government. And as I was mentioning, once we get a broad presidential declaration, you can see some of the programs that I think a lot of y'all are probably getting questions about. One of the more common ones, it's under the larger IA umbrella, but is the Individuals and Households program that you see listed there. That's what helps with individual home repair. It also helps as well with private roads and bridges, which I know are a big issue out there. There's disaster and employment assistance, and even if you can see my DLS, the program that we're working with, it is something that is triggered as part of a federally declared disaster, and helps us operate a hotline, and then also recruit volunteer attorneys to help out and in the event. And one of the things that helps out with is, like malpractice insurance is always a big, consideration. So it helps us basically put the structure in place so, attorneys don't have to worry about helping. We still train them up a lot, but it just puts the infrastructure in place to recruit a large number of volunteers. And, it would be very difficult to do it without that program. It's also, you see crisis counseling, SBA loans as well, but all those are triggered by that major disaster declaration. And do you want to, or I can keep.
Well, we don't need to spend too much time on this one, I guess.
Yeah.
It's just to give you that visual of this is a long haul. And the amount of time when you're talking about short-term recovery, intermediate versus long-term, that amount of time is going to depend on the scope and severity of the disaster. For Helene, we're anticipating like a 10-year recovery period for long-term, to put some perspective around the long-term need and time frame. And right now, a month and a half, almost 2 months after the date of the occurrence, we still feel like we're in short term, but we are starting to move towards intermediate. And that's just because this was such a large disaster for North Carolina.
Yeah.
Next slide. Yeah. There you go, Brad.
Yeah. And then this is, this is sort of I guess you could lay it on top of the graph that was there, but, a lot of feedback, we get. And even when I'll just say, when I first started doing this work, I had kind of no idea what I was doing. If I'm being honest, I just attached myself to the hip of people who seemed like they know what they were doing. And I had to get a sense of what all this looked like when I first got involved. I guess it was back in 2019 with some of this work. But as far as legal needs are concerned, they will mirror, in a lot of respects, sort of this response, short-term recovery, long-term recovery process. So right after an event, from a legal perspective, you're going to see a lot of people have, and survivors have issues with, landlord tenant. If you're renting, they'll have, often I know there was, a lot of issues with the power and utility companies that were out there, and other services. Like, I've heard people getting charged for the cable bill when they couldn't use cable, things like that. From a homeowner perspective, really the first thing you're dealing with is, I guess you'll get is, if you have insurance, that's like the first question that will pop up. So we'll try to help with a lot of insurance cases. If someone does not have insurance, or gets denied for their insurance, then sort of the next step you have, and this shows up there too, is to apply for FEMA or SBA assistance. But with a lot of these needs, as with the timeline you saw earlier, there is a term that you'll hear a lot in recovery. And we'll bring it up a few times here, but a sequence of delivery. And so um, there are groups out there that will want to make sure that funding, I guess funding that was potentially available before has been exhausted or is not an option for people. So if you don't have insurance, FEMA will try to make sure you're not getting any money from that or don't have that, and then they'll step in. And then all the groups that will come in behind will be, kind of asking those same questions. So um, you'll probably run into people that, they'll say that, hey, this group's asking all these questions. And a lot of it, this comes from the Stafford Act, which, doesn't allow, for, duplication of benefits for a lot of, for anyone that's utilizing these federal funding sources. But it also allows these groups to, if they're helping out somebody, they're making sure that they haven't exhausted all their options before they get to them, because these resources are finite. I know it seems, I mean, I've seen there's been a lot of money raised up front, which has been really tremendous. But there's a lot of need out there, and they're going to need every bit of money they can by the end of it. But noting some of this too, document replacement is something that goes into all of these. Any of these, like FEMA will want to look at documents. Groups that come in later will want to look at documents, and if someone ends up getting into other like state programs, they'll want to see documents. That's a huge thing. And then even a big issue, and then I'll let Brooke step in if she has anything else. We deal with a lot of getting into that 1 to 6 months, and even thereafter, see a lot of people that have property ownership related issues too, and a lot of air property and family land. And although FEMA has relaxed their requirements for obtaining assistance from them, you don't necessarily have to have clear title anymore. A lot of these programs coming in behind FEMA that are either doing heavy repair work or rebuilding, they will more than likely require something more than FEMA does. So we've seen it doesn't always have to be from organization to organization. It's a little different. It doesn't always have to be a clear title, but can be something, life estates. I know a lot of groups have started accepting, but it depends from organization to organization as well.
Yeah, and that's sort of the tricky and confusing bit about all of the recovery when you think about it long term. Every program, every nonprofit or state or federal program that gets spun up to help, and that includes FEMA's IHP program, um, they tend to have similar eligibility requirements, but they're all different. And then you've got survivors applying to FEMA and SBA now, and then dealing with insurance issues, and then down the road applying to maybe 2, 3, 5 different types of programs to seek assistance. It's a lot of administrative work. It's a lot of when you think about documents and documentation, it's a lot of paper to keep track of. And so thinking about you know why we're here today, how can library professionals help? There's a slide tailored to specifically ideas around how libraries and library professionals can help. Um, but in this immediate 1 to 6, and even getting into the longer term issues, the resources that y'all are able to provide patrons when it comes to internet access, maybe printing and scanning resources, navigating local document replacement, um, issues, and where do you go to get a copy of your deed? I mean, they're just sort of these questions that on a local level you can serve as navigators in this space and help folks and pull the documents that they need together, help folks apply for these different types of programs. FEMA's a big one right now, but they're going to be more down the road. Um, and so that's just really it's not a small thing, it's a huge thing, it's a huge help. And I see, and we see this not just in this disaster, but a trend in the disaster recovery framework of libraries being like your community pillars for where folks can come together to help each other and have the resources to be able to apply to these types of programs that are going to pop up. Next slide, please. And next slide. Okay, so these are just all the different types of sources of relief that are out there. It's all floating around. Insurance and FEMA and SBA. We've touched on disaster and employment assistance. For y'all specifically with Helene, this DUA deadline is tied to FEMA's individual and household program. So that's been extended. Your new extension date is beginning of January 7th now?
Yeah.
IRS offers some tax assistance and extensions, deadlines. A lot of this is also translatable to business relief too. USDA offers assistance, DLS, us legal assistance, VOADs, COADs, and LTRGs. You'll start to hear this a lot if you haven't already. So a VOAD is a voluntary organization active in disaster. COAD is a community organization active in disaster. And LTRG is a long-term recovery group. And communities, this is the type of framework that already exists. North Carolina has, North Carolina VOAD. And I think the important piece about that part of a relief source, these groups pop up to what you'll hear the term unmet needs, to serve unmet needs, and to do case management on the local and county level to help folks navigate all the different types of relief resources out there and maximize the assistance that you can get. There's a strong network on Eastern North Carolina's coast, right? I mean, because the eastern part of our state is used to this, right? We're used to getting hurricanes, and the counties have standing LTRGs that get activated when a major disaster declaration happens. And that's just happened over time because of the recurring disasters out there. This is a framework and a network that is now some counties and some localities, y'all are starting from square one. Some counties don't have an LTRG yet. Others may have one, but haven't had to use it. So as you're navigating this process, I think what I'm trying to say is just be thinking about this and planning for the long term and pulling together your community leaders who can help, your neighbors come together and address unmet needs in a systematic way. And Brad, we've helped folks form LTRGs, so I know you've done a lot of work around that in the past too.
Yeah, and it's all of these groups, and I know it's a lot of information that's coming at y'all, but I know there's going to be a lot of different resources that are flowing into your the various communities, but there's sort of I guess what I'm saying, that these disasters start local and end local, and we found those the community groups are critically important throughout all of this, and especially so as it gets a little further down the line as well, because going back to that continuum that was up there, there's already, I know some groups like Baptists on a Mission, Samaritan's Purse, those groups are already moving in, doing some what they'll call like muck and guts. It's like tear outs, and then they'll kind of start going to repair work and then rebuilding at some point. But groups like that, they have they'll be here for a time, but they won't be there forever. And so having I know the libraries are at the center of a lot of communities. I was even thinking about before I got on here, I couldn't confirm it, like the big storm I had growing up, it damaged, my library. I was at the children's library was in the basement. I was also aging out. So it took them a while to get back in there. But the libraries are at the center of it, and, these community efforts. But yeah, it's just a lot of different groups that are up there, and they all they all play a role. Um,
You may have all said this 1 second ago, but would you actually mind telling us what LTRG stands for?
A long-term recovery group, and I'll put it in the chat too. It's and you'll please like jump in and ask questions too, because a lot of these acronyms, when you live disaster work, it becomes a part of our life, and then when you're new to it, it's like what did you just say? So yes, I will put all of that in here for you guys.
Awesome,
and
thank you. Yeah, we're a field of acronyms as well, so we understand.
Yeah, and typically they're pretty county centric. You'll see a lot of, although sometimes you will see like, multiple counties that may have a closer relationship, work together to form one of these groups. But a lot of really a large role of those groups is we've mentioned all the different resources that are flowing into the county. One of the things one of their primary functions is they try to centralize the case management for local communities so that um, people have, I guess, like a trusted place they can go to, one to get information, but also the resources when they're moving into the community. They will check in, kind of check on the needs, and it helps, or at least I've found in my experience, it helps things move more efficiently, and also cuts down on confusion on behalf of the survivors too.
Oh, FEMA. So I'm not going to read this whole slide. We did provide like a PDF copy of this stuff, and so if y'all want to dig in, but I know you guys know about FEMA, so we don't need to go there. I think some things I'd like to highlight here is just how large FEMA is, and the within FEMA you have different types of individual assistance programs. And then one of those programs is the individual and household program, IHP. And that's when people think about applying or registering for FEMA, that's the one that we all think about. And that's what folks or individuals are applying to when they go to DRCs, these disaster recovery centers that have popped up. So we'll talk a lot more about IHP in the coming slides. But we had some questions that were submitted, before about how can y'all sort of dispel myths or help with misinformation issues. And I actually think you're perfectly positioned for it because you are trusted resources for your community. You have locations where you can post, whether physically on maybe a posting board or electronically, maybe your flyers that your trusted resources and partners are going to put out about this stuff. So FEMA, um, I'll get the link and I'll put it in the chat, but FEMA has websites for every single disaster that is declared, that is active. And so North Carolina for Helene has one, and that's where FEMA will post all of their public facing information. And they do a really great job about, on their PR side, at least on addressing issues as they start to pop up in a disaster. And so there's plenty of materials out there specifically for Helene and for North Carolina about, at one point it was addressing, FEMA's not alone, you know, um, addressing FEMA doesn't seize your property. So things like that. So I'll put that link in the chat as well. But I did want to make a note of those two, because those have been some big hot topic questions. People are really worried, and I understand that. So FEMA's not going to take your property, but what you don't hear often in the beginning about are things like recoupment and duplication of benefits, and those kind of can turn into some debt collection issues. So I'll send it to Brad to talk more about those that people should be aware of.
Yeah, a big part of what we try to do, not unlike what we're doing, here at this webinar, but Brooks is at a DRC right now in a closet somewhere. But a lot of what we're doing there too is trying. A lot of people, at this stage may not have a defined legal issue. So a lot of what we're doing is giving information out. So one of the things we try to make people aware of, especially early on, is that, as Brooks mentioned, FEMA is not a loan; it is a grant. But as I think most people on the call here are probably used to dealing with grants. Grants come with certain conditions too. You have to use the money in a particular way. So one of the things, like if we're talking to someone who's still waiting on a decision, from FEMA, we try to make them aware. We're like, look, if you do get any money in, one, it's meant to be used for, if you've applied for, like home repair assistance, it's meant to be used for that. It's meant to be used for a private road and bridge. Um, and you need to use it for that. And you also, a big thing we run into is you need to, get documentation that you have used it in a certain way. Because one of the things that may happen on the back end is that FEMA does have, they will believe they have 3 years to, audit some of their individual assistance funds. So what you'll see, I think if I'm going to ballpark it, maybe 2 years after a storm, people may get some, letters, like trying to, prove up how you use the money. A lot of times what I found too is that people have, in maybe an attempt to appeal for FEMA online, or have accidentally, or even over the phone, have accidentally mentioned that they need more money, but they have used the money in a way that they shouldn't have used it, and they say this without them knowing that. And I've seen that trigger recoupments. But as long as people are using it for the purpose that they need to use it for and are able to document that, they'll be fine. But and also say too, it won't. It's not only FEMA, like organizations that come in behind are looking to see how you've used the money, as well. So, I mean, I've mentioned it's true. Like one storm, a guy went to, he took off and went to Vegas, with a bunch of FEMA IHP money, and I think gambled it all away. And so not only did he have a problem with FEMA after that, but organizations, when they were looking to come in after the fact and try to assist them, he's not quite as sympathetic, as maybe some other people were. Another thing too is that, and we've had this question pop up as well. Let's say someone they get 25,000 from FEMA, but they have an estimate, that maybe they really need $100,000 worth of work. We can help them try to appeal that number up. But if that number doesn't go up, some of these other groups that are coming in can actually use their FEMA IHP money to help them repair their home. So a group like a Baptist or a Samaritan's Purse, they can use that 25,000 for materials, and then they have free labor. So they're able to stretch that money much further. But you just have to be very careful with that money up front. Both Brooks and I have seen people get in a hole by not using it correctly, or maybe not documenting that they did use it correctly.
Yeah. This is, I really like this graphic because it just shows you the whole process from start to finish, essentially, and what may come at the end if there's a recoupment issue. So your average applicant or registrant for FEMA, when they apply, they're going to submit their documentation. There may be a lag period between application and the inspector visit because someone may need to amend the application to add more information or clarify information, or submit things like receipts or their supporting documentation for the types of assistance that they need to essentially prove eligibility for. Then FEMA will go through an inspector visit to inspect, particularly for folks. An inspector visit will always happen. So this is really for folks who need help with the home repair assistance or the home assistance part of FEMA's IHP program. So an inspector will come out, they'll take a look, and document in FEMA's system the degree and level and type of damage. And then FEMA will make a determination on whether someone is eligible or not eligible for certain types of assistance under IHP. Then there is an appeals period. So you do have a right to an appeal. You or an applicant has a right to an appeal. I think this is a distinction from FEMA assistance itself. FEMA assistance is not intended to be a benefit, so that's why you hear it called assistance and not a benefit. So it's not the same thing as like Medicaid. So we don't necessarily have a right to the funds, but there are some statutory obligations that FEMA has to follow when it comes to giving someone some due process in an appeal period, and being able to submit an appeal if you disagree with a decision. So that could happen. Then an appeal decision would be made if one was ever needed. And then down the line, like what Brad just talked about, there may be recoupment. FEMA will audit files, and recoupment could pop up for folks. It certainly has in the past on previous disasters. So, next slide. Okay. Yeah. So FEMA IHP registration. I know right now many of you on this call may be very familiar with this because FEMA may be using your library as a DRC site. So you might actually be hosting a DRC actively right now or have in the past. And even if you aren't hosting, I'm sure you've had patrons come to you to use internet resources or computer resources and apply for FEMA. So there are lots of different ways to apply to FEMA. You can do it in person at those DRCs. You can do it on the phone. You can do it online. Something that's, I think, really important to remember in the application process is if you're going down the road of helping someone personally with applying, please keep in mind that person's capacity and resources to continue to upkeep the application on their own. And I guess what I really mean by that is if somebody's not familiar with the internet, they don't necessarily have an email address, or they have one, but they really don't use that email account. It might not be the best option for that person to apply online with an email address, because they might not receive notices that are really important about their case or about an appeal option that they may have. And it might be best to refer that person through the phone application or in person to a DRC and receive all of their notices via mail. So the registration period, it typically is 60 days post major disaster declaration. It may be extended. For our disaster right now, we initially had a deadline of IHP on the 27th of November. That has been extended to the 7th of January. And then when someone applies, or even after they apply, they may need to amend their application with certain information. So I've created a list of those critical documents and information. And I think this is really important for y'all on the call because this is the type of stuff that a survivor may have lost and needs to replace or track down this information to then be able to give it to FEMA or another recovery program. And this is the kind of stuff that I think library professionals are well positioned to help with. Brad, do you want to pick this one up?
Sure. Yeah, as Brooks was, mentioning too, a lot of y'all are, probably familiar with the, the DRC or the IHP application process. But yeah, I guess this whole thing was like, where can librarians, fit in? And so I know like a big thing and like a common thing, we would do, especially whenever, storm started in our old work was we would try to seek out libraries because it is a place, there's a lot of information out there in general, and it's all very confusing. And so we would, the library sort of, can serve as a sifter of like what may be, legitimate, what may be not. And so, we start by trying to, at least from the legal perspective, trying to get good information into the libraries. And we're, we also, try to, I know I've made myself available before if there was some not so good information that was being, if libraries had questions about information that was being provided there. Um, and so a lot of like where we have FEMA, SBA, LTRGs, Red Cross, all these other, and then the legal service providers with DLS, PISCA, um, and legal aid, start off by being a place if it doesn't, there's a lot of flyers that are out there, but it doesn't take too much space. But just a place where people can come get good information is a huge part of this. And then I know, like commonly too, in the second little paragraph here too, one of the things that's from a legal perspective that's going to start ramping up a little bit more is that at some point these DRCs will close down, and it's going to start being fairly soon. And so I know I'm trying to, I can't even count how many times that, that I've like been traveling to an area where I don't live and I need some place to meet, potentially with the clients, even being able to, I've had good relationships with, um, libraries out east where I would be able to, meet with a client in like a secure room. I use it for, I've used libraries to print just about everything out, too. So, and this is out in the eastern part of the state, but it's just it's just been really important for, I know both Brooks and our work, and even meeting with clients, and even I think the other thing we have here too is the legal clinics is something that will start up, um, once while some of the DRCs will be open, but you'll really see them sort of pop up more later on. So if some libraries have the ability to host these things, it's really helpful. But also it's circling back to there was the question about maybe some sort of misinformation getting out by FEMA. I think I'm acutely aware, and no Brooks is too. Like I'm not from the western part of the state. I'm not from there, and and this is a big thing in the eastern part of the state too. But there's always there's going to be like a trust factor when people you haven't seen before, which I think is a good reaction, start coming in and wanting to help out with things. And so we the library along with other organizations. And I'm not telling y'all to trust us outright. Vet us, grill us too. But it's something where having libraries, churches, other community organizations having good. We try to foster good relationships with those places so that um, so that we can be more effective in the communities and help and get out and help more people. But it's a process, but libraries have been integral to that as well, in the past. And I think even we've seen, sometimes we'll see, random, I think we were looking into the other day, there was some random legal services groups that were applying for things too. So even if y'all see stuff and you have questions about it, I know we try to make ourselves available to people as well to try to help y'all sift through some of that too. But yeah, just being there is a huge thing.
This is just to put it in the front of our minds, certain considerations that are really important when you're thinking through helping individuals, or even hosting a site for whether it's a DRC or a clinic. Obviously, your safety and security, but be thinking about accommodating persons with disabilities, persons who don't predominantly speak English, language assistance. What options would you have to be able to either serve in the moment or have a referral that you'd be able to quickly get in touch with to help somebody, whether it's with translation or interpretation? Um, the built environment capacity, alternative use, that's just a really fancy way of saying, think about your space and think about realistically what can your space do and what it cannot do. Um, and what are your boundaries? What are you okay with opening the space up for, and what are you not okay with as a group and as a community? Um, I love what Brad talked about before, being the trusted resource and vetting, for the protection of your community members and your patron, the information that you choose to post, and who you choose to put in your referral networks. And then, of course, establishing those long-term plans, because we're going to be here when we start getting in. We're already 2 months out. 6 months is going to be here before we know it. And so positioning yourselves now to know who are your long-term groups that are going to be here for a year to a couple of years, who are going to be planning groups and partners for the long haul. It's important to think about now. And I'm going to put in the chat the email address for Disaster Legal Services for North Carolina's response for Helene. If y'all are interested, if you're on the call or if you're watching this as a webinar, and you're interested in hosting legal clinics and things of that nature, or if you just have questions about, is this a trusted resource, and you want the TLS program to get involved on that level, please reach out to us.
Thank you both so much for sharing all of that information. It's really nice to hear how big of a role libraries have already been playing in your experiences. And so now I think we just want to open it up to the audience and see if there's any live questions that we want to answer. And if not, we can also talk about some of the questions submitted beforehand. Or do you all want to start with those? What's your preference?
No preference, whatever we want to do, we can cover it all.
Yeah, I think there's only one left over from what I could see. I mean, maybe we could address that one, and I wasn't entirely. I'm gonna try to take a stab at it because I know one of the questions was, I know we had a, question about, addressing, maybe people who need translation services, and I think we talked a little bit about that, and also this. I think we're making this slide available, correct, Brooks, to them. So it asked about screenshots, so we're going to provide that. Talked about potential FEMA misinformation, and the only other one that I saw was it read, where can we refer questions from callers needing information for a different state than the one we work in? I think that a good start, as Brooks mentioned, is that each disaster in each state. So like there's a North Carolina FEMA, Helene page. And so there could be a private page that's there. I know a lot of other states as well, typically, the emergency management groups that are there have, so if it's, let's just say someone got a call from Georgia, something like that. Typically they do a good job of, having an information hub. And then a lot of times they'll have maybe a 211 or an equivalent, but usually there's, pretty good, I guess, high level information that's there. Getting down into more specifics, I don't know, that they may have to go to that state and, ask them. But I think starting off with the FEMA pages, the state emergency management pages, and any sort of, and they may have, we mentioned VOADs, they may have a type of voluntary, I've said the acronym so many times, I don't even know what they mean, but sometimes it's voluntary organizations, I guess, involved in disaster, something or other. So, but yeah, I think that's a good start if you get an out-of-state call. And that was the last of the questions I think I saw. So.
Yeah, thank you so much. That sounds right to me too. So if anyone else who's on today wants to ask a question live, feel free to put that in the chat, or you can also unmute yourself and ask.
Didn't have a question, but I did have a comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I didn't know if you could hear me. So I'm at Mayland Community College in Spruce Pine, North Carolina, in Mitchell County. And we didn't host them in the library this week, but they were downstairs in our commons area. And just some of the things we found out that helped was to have really good Wi-Fi for them and easy to connect to, not guest Wi-Fi. They had to go get a code from the cell tower, which is not really pumping out like it used to do, and stuff like that. That made a difference because they all wanted to get their iPads on to help and just to make that personal connection. I think they were a little apprehensive coming into the area from some of the news stories, and some of the people here, it's big government. I don't want to talk to a government agency. And the more we talk to each other, the more people felt better about going by and just talking with them because they're just people and they're under uh, living in less than ideal conditions while they're up here working, and they're traveling a long way to get here. And even like we don't have food on campus. We're still got, have porta potties and no water and stuff. And so just they didn't bring lunch, you know what I mean? They hadn't thought about how they're going to get lunch. Just that personal thing to try to make them be a good host for them. And I think that helped us a lot on both sides, but both with them, and it helped our people to our students and our faculty and staff to feel more comfortable talking with them. And that's all I would add to it.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. That's great advice. Brad, did you want to say something about that?
Oh, yeah, I mean, that's just an important point. And, I mean, and it's, to the extent that we try to do it, I mentioned that, we're not from the area. And I know one of the things, in my day work, but in other things too, I try to sort of remove the abstraction from something. So, and I'll say at least with a lot of the FEMA folks, I think Brooks feel the same way. I've been working out, there's one thing when saying, FEMA's this giant federal agency, is this abstraction, but, I would, try to, one is just encourage people if they can get in there, if they want to go to the centers, like meet the people that aren't working there. So it may not be, it's not FEMA, this person may be, you're not talking to FEMA, you're talking to Michelle. And, I think just, getting, trying to, get directly in touch with those people helps out a lot. But it's also, we mentioned this is overwhelming in every sort of way. And it's good for people to be, skeptical, I think about things and ask questions. And one of the things that, we hope that with some of the, information we provide, but also trying to make ourselves, as accessible as we can be, is try to be, the libraries can be a place where questions can get answered, too. And that's just critically important with these things.
Yeah, thank you. If anyone else has other questions, please feel free to ask.
Brooks did make a really good slideshow. It's very comprehensive. So
I tried, y'all. And I tried to put, a good amount on the slides. So, if you're using it as a handout,
yeah.
It'll be there. And I'm very thankful for the time today and for NC Live reaching out to us and pulling all of this together, because y'all are critical. Y'all being everybody on this call, librarians, library professionals, libraries. You really are, when it comes to disaster recovery, a safe space where folks are coming to and will continue to come to receive help. So anything we can provide or help you with, would love to continue this relationship and help your communities recover.
Yeah, thank you both so much for your expertise and for these really awesome slides. I'm seeing some more of that appreciation in the chat, so it's good to see.